They laughed when the maintenance tech offered the intern a chair. Said she was lucky he even noticed her. Then the intern smirked and ordered him to redo his work, twice, just to see if he'd break. The single dad didn't argue. He just adjusted his badge, checked the server room panel, and kept moving. What none of them saw was how calmly he was measuring the building's real weak point, because before this week ended, the entire company would choke on a crisis money couldn't fix. Before I show you the exact moment the intern's fake ID got overridden by a military-grade security prompt. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. What was really happening beneath the surface wasn't about an intern or a maintenance request. It was about power testing humanity, and only one man refusing to fail that test. Rowan Hale didn't look like someone who'd once commanded secure networks that governments trusted with their secrets. Oil smudged his knuckles. His boots were worn soft at the heel. He moved through the service corridor like he belonged there, because he did. He tightened the panel screws without rushing, didn't glance up when the laughter echoed from the glass hallway. "Redo it," the intern had said lightly. "The alignment's off." "It isn't," he'd answered, calm as still water. "But I can check it again." Now he did. Again. The air in the service corridor carried the hum of chilled servers and the faint metallic tang of conditioned air. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead. Beyond the coated door, executives in tailored suits drifted past marble floors and abstract art worth more than his annual salary. He'd learned long ago that pride was loud. Discipline was quiet. The intern, Alara Vance, though no one here was supposed to know that, watched from the threshold with a tablet tucked under her arm. She wore anonymity like a tailored coat. Neutral blouse. Low heels. Nothing that screamed power, everything that measured it. Most employees either ignored her or performed kindness too loudly. Rowan had simply noticed she'd been standing for 10 minutes and slid a folding chair toward her without comment. That small gesture had unsettled her more than defiance would have. She'd expected resentment. Or flattery. Not decency. "Maintenance usually doesn't question directives," she said now, voice mild, eyes sharp. "I didn't question it," he replied. "Just making sure we're solving the right problem." A couple of junior analysts passing by exchanged glances. One smirked. The other whispered something about hero complex. Rowan ignored it. He finished the panel check, ran a silent diagnostic through the interface hidden behind his badge clearance. Clearance that technically exceeded what a maintenance tech required, and stepped back. Green lights. Stable, but beneath that stability he felt something else. A latency pulse. Barely perceptible, like a tremor under polished tile. He didn't show it. "Done," he said simply. The intern studied him, as if waiting for irritation to leak through. It didn't. "Good," she said. "You can check the lobby access sensors next." He nodded. No sigh, no edge, just motion. He moved through the service elevator, descending past executive floors that required biometric entry he could bypass if he chose. He didn't choose, because his real priority wasn't ego. It was Mila. His daughter's name vibrated quietly in his mind the way the building's infrastructure vibrated in the walls. 8 years old. Too thin from the heart surgery last spring. Brave in a way that hurt to witness. Her follow-up appointment was in 3 days. Insurance covered it because he worked here, which meant no outbursts, no righteous speeches, no risks. The lobby sensors blinked amber when he arrived. 2 security contractors hovered nearby, confused. "System glitch," one muttered. "It says it's nothing." Rowan crouched, opened the panel, and listened. Not to the contractors, to the rhythm. There it was again. A fractional delay in the handshake between access node and central server. Not mechanical, digital. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Upstairs, through the glass and steel and curated arrogance, executives debated quarterly projections. Down here, something else was breathing through the wires. The intern appeared again, silent as a shadow. "Problem?" she asked. "Not yet," he said. Meaning it could become one. She studied his profile, the steadiness, the lack of performance. Most people tried to impress authority. He treated her like a person. That unsettled her more than hostility. "You seem very confident for someone in facilities," she said. He met her gaze evenly. Confidence doesn't belong to job titles. For a second, just a second, something flickered behind her eyes. Recognition? Irritation? Curiosity? Footsteps echoed across marble. Gareth Morrow's voice carried from the executive wing, sharp and dismissive about minor system noise. Rowan closed the sensor panel and stood. "It's contained," he said. For now?" She repeated. He wiped his hands on a cloth and clipped it back to his belt. "For now," he said again, already calculating contingencies he hoped he wouldn't need. Because if the tremor beneath the floor became an earthquake, the people laughing in glass offices wouldn't know where to start. But he would. And somewhere above them, hidden behind intern credentials and quiet cruelty, the CEO watched the maintenance tech walk away. Still calm, still human, without realizing the building she owned was already shifting under her feet. Alara didn't follow him immediately. She stood in the lobby beneath the vaulted glass ceiling, watching the reflection of employees glide across polished marble. Everything looked seamless, efficient, profitable. But she couldn't shake the way he'd said it. For now, upstairs, Gareth Morrow was already spinning the morning's sensor delay into a narrative about maintenance oversight. His voice carried through the open executive corridor, smug and controlled. "These glitches happen when lower-tier compliance gets sloppy," he said. "We'll tighten procedures." Rowan heard it from the service stairwell. He didn't react outwardly. He rarely did. Instead, he stepped into the access terminal beside the stairwell landing and quietly pulled the network's surface-level diagnostics. Nothing that would trigger alerts. Just enough to confirm what he'd sensed. Latency spikes. Microbursts. Unauthorized pings bouncing off the perimeter firewall like someone tapping glass to see if it would crack. His pulse didn't rise, but his focus sharpened. This wasn't sloppiness. This was reconnaissance. Footsteps clicked behind him. The intern again. "You're thorough," she said. "Habit," he replied. She leaned lightly against the railing, studying the stairwell like it was beneath her, though she'd chosen to stand there. "You talk like you've handled bigger systems." He shrugged. "Systems are systems. That's not an answer, that's enough of one." Her jaw tightened almost invisibly. Most employees either over-explained or apologized. He did neither. "Let me guess," she continued. "You think it missed something. I think everyone misses something," he said calmly. "Depends what they're trained to see." The words landed harder than he intended. For a split second, something defensive flared in her eyes. Not anger, challenge. "And what are you trained to see?" she asked. He clipped the terminal closed. "Loose screws," he said. Then he walked past her. The faint scent of expensive perfume followed him down the stairwell. Out in the parking garage, his phone vibrated. Mila's caregiver. He answered on the second ring. "Hey," he said, voice softening instantly. A pause. Then concern. Insurance confirmation paperwork hadn't been processed yet. The clinic was asking for verification before Thursday's appointment. His grip tightened on the phone. "I'll handle it," he said. "Don't worry. Is she okay?" "She's drawing," the caregiver said. "She asked if you were fixing something important today." He looked up at the concrete beams above him, listening to the faint vibration of the building's infrastructure. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I am." When the call ended, he stood still for a moment. This job wasn't pride. It was oxygen. Back upstairs, Alara re-entered the executive wing just in time to hear Gareth instruct a department head to draft a memo tightening oversight on facilities access. "We can't have maintenance freelancing diagnostics," Gareth said. "It creates liability." Alara said nothing. Instead, she walked to her temporary intern desk, deliberately placed near operations, and opened a restricted monitoring dashboard only she could access. She expected to see routine traffic. She didn't. There it was again. Tiny unauthorized probes brushing against internal partitions, almost elegant in their restraint. Her stomach cooled. Someone was mapping her company, and the only person who'd sensed it without the tools she was using was the man tightening lobby sensors. She closed the dashboard quickly when footsteps approached. Rowan re-entered the floor to collect a toolkit he'd left near the service entrance. Employees moved around him like he was furniture. One analyst bumped his shoulder without apology. Another whispered, "Intern's pet project." He ignored them. He'd been underestimated before. Underestimation was a resource if you knew how to use it. The intern intercepted him near the service elevator again. If there were a larger issue, she asked carefully, "What would you do?" He studied her for a long moment. The fluorescent lights reflected faintly in her eyes. "Depends who's asking," he said. Hypothetically. He inhaled slowly. "First, I'd isolate the noise. Then I'd look for the entry point no one wants to admit exists. And if leadership didn't listen, a beat. Then I'd document everything." The elevator doors slid open with a metallic sigh. He stepped inside. As they began to close, he added quietly, "Panic makes people stupid. Documentation doesn't. The door's sealed." Alara stood alone in the corridor, pulse steady but thoughts shifting. He wasn't guessing, he was assessing. And if she was honest with herself, he was doing it better than the executives she paid 7 figures to protect her company. By the way, if you've ever watched someone get blamed for a problem they didn't cause, subscribe now. Because what's coming is bigger than a broken sensor. Down in the service corridor, Rowan reopened the network terminal for exactly 90 seconds, long enough to capture a snapshot of the anomaly pattern and encrypt it onto a small diagnostic drive he carried on his key ring. Insurance paperwork. Clinic deadlines. Mortgage. He didn't have the luxury of being right loudly, but he could be right quietly. Above him, in a corner office she hadn't occupied all week, the CEO stared at the anomaly graph pulsing across her hidden screen. The tremor was getting stronger, and somewhere between polished marble and humming servers, both of them knew. For now it is ending. The latency spike didn't fade this time. It lingered. Up in operations, a row of monitors flickered, then stabilized, then flickered again. A junior analyst frowned at her dashboard. That's weird. Across the floor, someone laughed too loudly at a joke that wasn't funny. Gareth was mid-sentence about quarterly growth when the projection screen behind him glitched, just for half a second. Numbers blurred, then snapped back. "Visual lag," he said smoothly. "Continue." But the air had shifted. Downstairs, Rowan felt it before he saw it. The server room carried a different sound now. Not louder, just tighter. The hum of cooled air moving through vents had an edge to it, like a held breath. He stepped inside the restricted cage and ran his hand along the metal housing of the primary rack. Cool. Stable. His eyes tracked the status lights. Green. 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 Then a flicker of amber that corrected itself too quickly. He crouched, plugging his diagnostic drive into an auxiliary port no one bothered to monitor because no one in maintenance should have known it existed. Data streamed across his small handheld display. Unauthorized handshake attempts. Careful ones. Layered. He exhaled slowly. Not random. Not internal incompetence. External. Above him, the intern stood at her borrowed desk, watching the same anomaly from a different angle. Her private dashboard showed a faint signature brushing against the outer firewall again, probing for pattern recognition weaknesses. Someone was patient. That unsettled her more than aggression would have. Gareth strode across the floor toward her. "You seeing these blips?" he asked casually, unaware of who he was speaking to. "Maybe," she said. "It assures me it's cosmetic. Routine background noise." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced toward the service elevator indicator light. Descending. He was still down there. "You trust that?" she asked. Gareth smiled thinly. "I trust our executives. That's not what I asked." His expression hardened slightly. "You're here to observe culture, not interrogate it. Culture." The word tasted wrong. At that exact moment, a ripple passed through the floor's access system. 3 employees attempting to badge into a restricted finance suite were denied. "What the hell?" one muttered. They tried again. Denied. Across the room, someone else's login timed out mid-entry. Phones began ringing. Rowan unplugged the drive and stood. The tremor had become a pattern. He moved quickly but without drama, exiting the server cage and heading for the stairwell instead of the elevator. Elevators were slower. Predictable. As he climbed, his mind mapped contingencies automatically. If the breach was reconnaissance, this was escalation testing. If it was escalation, Phase 2 would target either payroll or client data partitions. He reached the operations floor just as a murmur turned into sharp concern. "It's spreading," the junior analyst whispered. Gareth snapped. "Calm down. It's a temporary sync delay." Rowan stepped toward the nearest terminal, careful not to draw attention. "May I?" he asked the analyst. She hesitated. Looked at Gareth. Gareth scoffed. "Maintenance doesn't troubleshoot network infrastructure." Rowan didn't argue. He simply watched the pattern scroll. There, a staggered echo across 3 departments. He felt the intern's eyes on him. "You see something?" she asked. "Yes," he said. Gareth crossed his arms. "Enlighten us." Rowan kept his voice level. "It's not random noise. It's structured probing. Someone's mapping internal partitions." Silence. Then a short, dismissive laugh. "And you know that because the timing intervals aren't mechanical. They're adaptive." The intern's gaze sharpened. "Adaptive how?" she pressed. He gestured lightly at the screen. "They're adjusting based on response time. That means whoever's on the other end is watching." A faint chill slid through the room. Gareth's jaw tightened. Speculation. Rowan met his eyes evenly. "No. Observation." Before Gareth could respond, the projection screen behind him went black. Completely black. Then a single blinking cursor appeared in the corner. No one breathed. Headphones exploded in ringing. "What did you do?" Gareth barked at the analyst. "I didn't." Rowan stepped back from the terminal. "Phase 2. He didn't say it aloud. The blinking cursor vanished. The screen returned, but the quarterly data was gone. Replaced with a system error message that shouldn't have been possible from outside the internal network. Unauthorized access attempt. Finance core. Hilara felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't cosmetic, and the only person in the room who looked unsurprised was the man everyone kept dismissing. She walked toward him slowly. "If you're right," she said quietly, "what happens next?" He didn't look at her immediately. His eyes tracked the lower corner of the screen where a fractional timestamp updated. "They'll test payroll next," he said. "Then client vaults." Gareth snapped. "Stop fear-mongering." Rowan finally turned to him. "I hope I'm wrong. As if summoned by the words, a notification tone pinged across the operations floor. Payroll access locked. A collective inhale. Someone whispered, "This can't be happening." Rowan's mind moved ahead 3 steps. Insurance paperwork. Thursday. He swallowed that thought down. The intern stepped closer to him than she had all week. "What do you need?" she asked. For the first time, her voice carried no mockery, only urgency. He studied her for a long second, measuring more than the crisis. "I need authority to isolate the finance core from the main grid," he said. "Now." Gareth laughed sharply. "Absolutely not." Rowan didn't raise his voice. "If you don't," he said calmly, "you won't have a company left to protect." And somewhere in the charged silence between marble and metal, the battle line shifted, not between maintenance and executives, but between denial and reality. "Absolutely not," Gareth repeated, louder this time. "We don't hand system control to facilities staff during a minor disruption." "Minor?" The junior analyst whispered, staring at the payroll lock notification, flashing red across her screen. Rowan didn't move. He didn't argue. He simply watched the timestamp in the lower corner tick forward in uneven increments. The intern stood between them now, close enough that he could hear the subtle change in her breathing. Controlled. Calculating. "What's the risk if we isolate the finance core?" she asked. Gareth turned to her sharply. "The risk is operational paralysis. We lose visibility. We look incompetent." Rowan's gaze remained on the screen. "You already have." The words landed without volume, but they struck harder than shouting would have. Gareth stepped toward him. "You're out of line." "No," Rowan said evenly. "I'm out of time." Another notification chimed. "Client vault partition experiencing access delay." A ripple of panic spread across the floor. Phones rang. Slack channels exploded. Someone cursed under their breath. The hum of the building felt different now. Less like machinery, more like pressure building inside a sealed container. Ilara's eyes flicked between Gareth and the maintenance tech. "Explain isolation," she said quietly. Rowan finally turned fully toward her. "We segment the finance core from the main grid. Hard firewall. Manual routing only. It'll freeze non-essential processes, but it stops lateral movement. And payroll? Already compromised if we don't." Gareth scoffed. "You're assuming breach without proof." Rowan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The proof is the pattern. They're escalating access testing, adaptive intervals. They're inside the perimeter, silence. Then, every screen on the operations floor flickered simultaneously. Not off, just enough to make everyone flinch. The overhead lights dimmed for half a second before stabilizing. That wasn't a network. That was infrastructure. A murmur of fear rolled through the employees. The analyst beside Rowan whispered, "That's not cosmetic." He felt it too. The tremor beneath the surface had grown teeth. Ilara stepped closer. "If we isolate, how long can you contain it?" He didn't hesitate. "Long enough to find the entry point." "And if you're wrong?" He met her gaze steadily. "Then, you fire me." Gareth laughed sharply. "Don't tempt me." Rowan didn't look at him. "But if I'm right and you delay, you'll lose more than a job." A beat of charged quiet. Somewhere across the floor, a printer began spitting out error sheets uncontrollably. Paper spilled onto marble like white flags. Ilara felt the weight of something unfamiliar pressing against her. Uncertainty she couldn't solve with authority. She'd built this company in control. Precision, dominance in negotiation rooms where she never blinked first. But this wasn't a negotiation, it was a siege. Another alert pulsed. "Client vault. Access attempt blocked." Blocked. The word cut through the noise. Blocked by what? Gareth snapped. The analyst swallowed. By an internal manual override, Everyone's eyes moved slowly toward Rowan. He hadn't touched the system since stepping back. But he knew what had happened. The auxiliary diagnostic he'd plugged in earlier had triggered a passive defense protocol, an old failsafe he recognized from years ago. The company had licensed a security suite built off architecture he once helped design. They didn't even know. He stepped forward again, carefully. "That block won't hold," he said. "It's reactive, not proactive." Gareth's face flushed. "How would you know that?" Rowan didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked at the intern. "Because I've seen what comes next." The floor felt smaller now. Glass walls reflected anxious faces. The marble that once signaled power now felt cold and fragile. Alara's mind raced. He wasn't guessing. He was predicting. "Gareth," she said evenly, never breaking eye contact with Rowan, "authorized temporary segmentation." Gareth stared at her. "You don't have that authority." She held his gaze a fraction too long. "Try me." For a second, something unreadable passed between them. Then Gareth exhaled sharply. "Fine. Temporary. And if this backfires?" "It won't," Rowan said quietly. He moved to the terminal, fingers steady as he accessed the deeper routing menu. The room watched. The maintenance staff didn't navigate these layers. He did. Manual partition request initiated. The system prompted for elevated credentials. A subtle pause. He entered a string not from memory of this building, but from memory of architecture patterns. The screen processed. Accepted. Gareth blinked. "How did you?" Finance core isolated. The operations floor fell into an eerie stillness as non-essential dashboards froze. Emails paused mid-delivery. A few executives shouted from offices as their access was cut out, but the vault alert stopped blinking. The tremor slowed. For now. Rowan stepped back. "It bought us time," he said. Alara stared at him, pulse steady but thoughts unraveling. "You said you'd seen what comes next," she said softly. "What is it?" He looked toward the ceiling, as if listening to the building itself. "They'll change tactics," he replied. "If mapping doesn't work, they'll trigger visible disruption." As if summoned by the words, a low alarm tone began to pulse faintly from the infrastructure system. Not loud, not dramatic, but deliberate. The building had moved from probing to pressure, and every eye on the floor now understood something none of them wanted to admit. The maintenance tech wasn't overstepping. He was leading. The low alarm tone deepened, no longer faint but steady, vibrating through the marble beneath their shoes. Screens across operations flashed a synchronized warning. "Core network instability detected." "Why is it getting worse?" someone whispered. Rowan didn't answer immediately. He was already moving. "Because they noticed the isolation," he said calmly. "We forced their hand." The air felt thinner now, recycled oxygen humming harder through ceiling vents. He crossed to a secondary terminal and began rerouting non-critical traffic manually, fingers moving with quiet certainty. Gareth hovered close behind him. "You said isolation would contain it." "It did," Rowan replied. "Containment isn't elimination." Another alert. This one is sharper. Client vault partition encryption cycling. Alara felt the floor tilt under her certainty. "Cycling means what?" she asked. "It means they're testing encryption keys," he said. "Trying to force a reset." "Can they?" Gareth demanded. "Yes." The single syllable hit like a dropped weight. Phones rang again. An executive assistant rushed out of a glass office. "Board members are calling. They're seeing delays in external reporting dashboards." Rowan exhaled through his nose, mind accelerating. "They're creating visible instability to pressure you into reopening segmentation," he said without looking at Gareth. "If you panic and reconnect the finance core to the main grid, they'll move laterally and drain everything." Gareth's jaw flexed. You're speculating. Rowan glanced up briefly. I'm not. The alarm tone shifted frequency. That wasn't a network. That was building systems responding to grid stress. He stepped back from the terminal and scanned the room. Where's your main control interface? Gareth blinked. It handles. Where, Rowan repeated, still calm, is the physical override? Alara answered before Gareth could. Sublevel 2. Secure operations. He nodded once. We go there, Gareth scoffed. Absolutely not. We don't abandon the floor during an active breach. Rowan turned toward him fully. If the breach escalates into infrastructure control, you won't have a floor. The words settled heavily in the air. Alara made a decision. We're going, she said. Gareth stared at her. You don't have clearance. Her gaze hardened just enough. You're right. Then she walked toward the service elevator. Rowan followed without hesitation. As the doors closed, the operations floor buzzed with anxious voices. The junior analyst looked after them, eyes wide, as if she'd just watched the axis of power shift. The elevator descended slowly, humming through reinforced concrete levels most executives never saw. Sublevel 2 smelled different, cooler, metallic, with the faint scent of ozone. Rows of control racks lined the dim corridor. Emergency lighting cast everything in a muted amber glow. The alarm tone was louder here. Rowan stepped into the secure operations room and froze for half a second. The attack wasn't just digital. Load indicators on the building's internal grid were spiking unnaturally. SVAC systems were being forced into synchronized cycles. Elevators had begun micro-pausing between floors. They're trying to create cascading failures, he said quietly. Alara felt her stomach tighten. Why? To divide attention. Make you choose between systems. Gareth entered behind them, visibly unsettled now. Fix it. Rowan ignored the command. He approached the main infrastructure console and examined the live feed. The encryption cycling had accelerated. External pings were no longer subtle. They were synchronized bursts. They're escalating, he said. Fast. Alara stepped closer to him than she had all week. Tell me what you need. He didn't hesitate. Full administrative override. Physical key access. And everyone else out of this room. Gareth's voice rose. You don't get to issue orders. Rowan finally looked at him with something that wasn't anger, but wasn't softness either. I'm not issuing orders, he said. I'm offering survival. A harsh vibration rippled through the floor as one of the elevator systems above misaligned briefly. Alara turned to Gareth. Out. For a split second he looked ready to argue. Then another alert shrieked from the console. He backed toward the door, muttering. When the room cleared, the silence between them felt different. She reached into her jacket pocket. A small biometric key. Not intern issued. Executive. She placed it on the console. Full administrative override, she said. He didn't comment on what that implied. Instead, he inserted the key and initiated manual command routing. The screen prompted for multi-layer authentication. He began typing, fast, precise. His posture changed subtly, not louder, not dramatic, but focused in a way that didn't belong to maintenance corridors. Alara watched the reflection of code flicker across his face. Who are you? She asked quietly. He didn't look at her. Right now? He said. I'm the guy keeping your building from turning on itself. The infrastructure graph stabilized momentarily, then spiked again, harder. The attack had shifted, no longer probing, now forcing. Rowan's hands never shook. They're pushing for a system-wide reset, he murmured. If they trigger it, payroll, client vaults, insurance databases, everything wipes to backup. Her breath caught. Insurance databases. He didn't know she heard that word differently now. They can't, she whispered. They can, he said. A warning flashed red across the console. System reset authorization requested. External origin masked. The building held its breath. He leaned closer to the screen. "Okay," he said softly. "Now we're done waiting." And for the first time since the alarms began, there was something unmistakable in his voice. Not fear, not uncertainty, but readiness. The red warning pulsed harder across the console. System reset authorization requested. External origin masked. Alara felt her pulse in her throat. "If that executes, it won't," he said quietly. "How can you be sure?" "I'm not," he replied. "I'm faster." His fingers moved again, no hesitation now. He bypassed the standard interface and opened a command layer buried beneath the visible architecture. The kind of layer that wasn't documented in employee manuals. The kind of layer you only knew existed if you'd once helped design defensive frameworks. A sharp tremor rippled through the building as another elevator above ground stuttered between floors. Somewhere distant, someone shouted. "They're increasing load pressure," he said. "Trying to trigger automatic compliance." "Compliance with what?" she asked. "With the reset." The console flashed. Authorization escalation in progress. He exhaled once. Steady. "Okay," he murmured to himself. "You want escalation." He initiated a counter-segmentation, isolating not just the finance core but the infrastructure handshake protocol itself. The screen froze for half a second, then flooded with cascading lines of code. Alara stared. "You're not using our interface," she said slowly. "No," he replied. "Yours is too slow." Another spike hit. The lights flickered harder this time, dimming long enough to feel dangerous. From somewhere upstairs, emergency sirens began a low mechanical wail. Her company, her empire, was slipping, and the only person not unraveling was the man she'd ordered to redo panel screws. The reset authorization bar climbed to 60%. He leaned closer to the screen, jaw tight. "They've embedded a persistent script," he said. "Clever. You sound impressed. I am 70%. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small diagnostic drive he'd used earlier, plugged it directly into the console. Alara's eyes narrowed. "What is that?" "Insurance," he said. For a split second, she thought he meant paperwork. Then the screen changed. A counterscript deployed, custom, precise, built to intercept forced reset cascades before they completed. It wrapped around the authorization request like wire tightening around a limb. 82%. "Come on," he muttered under his breath. The building groaned softly, vac systems cycling in uneven bursts. Upstairs, payroll terminals went dark entirely. Her stomach dropped. "My employees will still get paid," he said firmly. "If we hold, 91%. The red bar pulsed, 985. He typed faster, rerouting the masked origin signature into a sandboxed partition he'd created seconds earlier. The console froze, 99%. Alara realized she was holding her breath. Then, the bar stopped. The word "denied" flashed across the screen in bold white letters. Silence. Not complete silence, alarms still hummed faintly. But the violent edge was gone. Load indicators dropped from critical red to unstable amber. The building exhaled. Rowan didn't celebrate. He kept typing, reinforcing the containment barrier, tracing the masked origin through the rerouted sandbox. "They're locked out of reset," he said. "For now." She almost laughed at the phrase. "For now," she repeated quietly. He glanced at her briefly. "I don't say it lightly." Above them, the elevator tremors ceased. SVAC cycles smoothed into normal rhythm. The infrastructure graph leveled. The attack hadn't vanished. But it stopped mid-strike. She stared at the console, then at him. "You didn't just isolate," she said slowly. "You anticipated the override." He removed the drive, slipping it back onto his keyring. "They weren't subtle," he said. "That's not what I meant." For the first time since the crisis escalated, he met her eyes fully. And she saw it. Not ego. Not defiance. Experience. "You've handled something like this before," she said. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled up the masked origin trace and began dissecting it with clinical focus. "I've seen systems fall because leadership thought money could outpace math," he said at last. Her chest tightened. That wasn't an answer either. A faint ghost of something, not quite a smile, touched his mouth. "Loose screws," he said. She studied him in the dim amber light of Sublevel 2, alarms fading into background hum. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like a father who hadn't slept enough, like a man who packed modest lunches and showed up early and stayed late, like someone power overlooked. And yet, the authorization log remained frozen at 99% denied. A corporate catastrophe halted inches from execution. She swallowed. "If you hadn't been here," she began. He cut her off gently. "I am here." Footsteps pounded down the corridor outside. Gareth burst into the operations room, face pale. "Is it contained?" he demanded. Rowan stepped back from the console. "For now," he said again. Gareth stared at the stabilized monitors, confusion and reluctant relief battling across his features. "How?" he asked. Rowan wiped his hands on a cloth out of habit. "Manual override," he replied simply. Gareth looked at Alara. "We need to credit it publicly. Control the narrative." Alara didn't respond. Her eyes were still on the man who just outmaneuvered an external cyber assault using tools he technically shouldn't have known existed. Outside the room, the building returned to its polished illusion of calm. Inside, something irreversible had shifted. Because this hadn't been luck. It hadn't been guesswork. It had precision under pressure, and the CEO, still disguised, still silent about who she really was, understood one terrifying truth. The maintenance tech she'd tried to break wasn't beneath her company's power structure. He was the only reason it still existed. Gareth stepped farther into the operations room, trying to recover his authority along with his breath. "We'll issue a statement that it neutralized an attempted disruption," he said briskly. "Minimal details. No need to alarm clients." Rowan didn't argue. He simply watched the infrastructure graph stabilize fully into green bands. Alara studied him instead. "You said they're locked out of reset," she said carefully. "But are they out of the system?" He shook his head once. "No," Gareth frowned. "You just said it's contained." "It is," Rowan replied evenly. "Contained doesn't mean gone." The words seemed to irritate Gareth more than the crisis itself. "You're speaking in riddles." "No," he said calmly. "I'm speaking precisely." Alara folded her arms, feeling the weight of something unfamiliar pressing on her. Trust. Not in her executives. In him. "Explain," she said. He turned back to the console and pulled up the sandbox partition where he'd trapped the reset authorization attempt. Lines of code scrolled in controlled isolation, like a captured animal pacing a cage. "They embedded a persistence layer," he said. "When the reset failed, it pivoted." "Pivot to what?" Gareth demanded. "Observation." Silence settled again. "They're still watching us?" Alara asked quietly. Yes, a chill slid down her spine. "They'll try again?" she asked. "Probably," he said. "But differently," Gareth scoffed. "Speculation." Rowan finally looked at him with something sharper beneath the calm. "Patterns." Gareth opened his mouth to retort, but the console chimed softly, an alert not red, not amber. Blue. Rowan's eyes narrowed. "What is that?" Alara asked. He leaned closer. "It's not attacking," he murmured. "It's learning." "Learning?" Gareth snapped. "From what?" "From our response." The room felt smaller. Alara stepped nearer to the console, shoulder almost brushing his. "Can we trace it?" "Not cleanly," he said. "It's masked through layered proxies." But the architecture? He paused. What about it? She pressed. He hesitated for the first time since the breach escalated. It's familiar, her breath stilled. Familiar how? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket again and turned the small diagnostic drive between his fingers, thoughtful. Gareth threw up his hands. We don't have time for cryptic pauses. If you know something, say it. Rowan's gaze lifted slowly. It's built off a framework that was classified 5 years ago. The words dropped like a stone in water. Alara's pulse skipped. Classified? Gareth repeated incredulously. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything, Rowan said. I'm recognizing patterns. Gareth stared at him. And how would a maintenance technician recognize classified architecture? Silence. Not the kind born of uncertainty. The kind born of choice. Rowan could feel the weight of Mila's appointment in his chest. Insurance paperwork, stability, normalcy. Revealing too much meant scrutiny. Scrutiny meant risk. But withholding meant vulnerability. He chose carefully. I worked with systems like this before, he said at last. Gareth barked a humorless laugh. Doing what? Cleaning them? Alara shot Gareth a look sharp enough to cut. Rowan didn't react to the insult. I wasn't always in the facilities, he said simply. The understatement was almost absurd. Alara stepped closer, lowering her voice. What were you? He held her gaze. Someone who learned that infrastructure fails when leadership underestimates quiet threats. It wasn't a full answer, but it was more than he'd given all week. Gareth shook his head. This is ridiculous. We'll bring in external consultants, real experts. Rowan nodded once. You should. The agreement caught Gareth off guard. But until they arrive, Rowan continued calmly, we need to reinforce internal segmentation and rotate encryption keys manually. Gareth scoffed. That would require executive-level authorization. Alara's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. And if we don't? She asked. They'll probe again within the hour, he said. Different angle. Maybe client communications. Maybe HR records. Somewhere you won't expect. The faint blue alert pulsed again. Watching, waiting. Alara felt something fracture inside her carefully constructed certainty. She'd built Vance Dynamics on dominance, anticipating competitors, crushing inefficiency, never appearing vulnerable. Yet she hadn't anticipated this. And she hadn't anticipated him. You predicted the reset, she said quietly. You predicted the pivot. What would you do next if this were your system? The phrasing lingered. If this were yours. He answered without hesitation. I'd assume the attacker wants leverage, not chaos. They're testing resilience. If they can't force a reset, they'll try reputational damage. Gareth rolled his eyes. Conspiracy thinking. Rowan's voice remained steady. It's not a conspiracy if the evidence is on the screen. The building above them had returned to polished calm. Employees were likely telling themselves it had been a glitch, a hiccup. But down here, the truth glowed faint blue on a dark monitor. Alara studied him one more time. You said the framework was classified, she said softly. Military? A flicker crossed his eyes, memory perhaps. Adjacent, he replied. The answer was careful. But it was enough. Gareth straightened, trying to reclaim control. We'll convene the board in 30 minutes. This narrative gets handled properly. Rowan nodded. Do that, he said. But don't reconnect the finance core, Gareth bristled. You don't give orders. No, Rowan agreed quietly. I prevent disasters. Another soft blue pulse. Observation ongoing. Alara felt the weight of the room shift again, not dramatically, not explosively, but undeniably. The crisis hadn't exposed weakness in her company's infrastructure. It had exposed weakness in her leadership hierarchy. And standing under amber lights in Sublevel 2, she realized something she hadn't expected to learn during her undercover week. The only person who had treated her like a human being. might also be the only person capable of protecting everything she'd built. The blue pulse on the monitor flickered again. Observation ongoing. Rowan stared at it for a long second, then reached past the primary console and opened a secondary infrastructure map most executives didn't even know existed. Sublevel schematics layered over digital architecture, physical and virtual grids overlapping like transparent blueprints. "We don't have 30 minutes, he said quietly. Gareth stiffened. The board is already assembling. They can assemble, Rowan replied. But if we don't harden the outer partitions before they try again, you'll be explaining more than a glitch. Alara folded her arms, watching him navigate through the hidden layers of her own company's system with unnerving familiarity. "What do you need?" she asked. He didn't look at her this time. "Permission to rotate master encryption keys manually," he said, "and physical access to the executive data vault." Gareth barked a laugh. "Absolutely not. That vault requires biometric clearance." Rowan glanced at him. "Then use it." A tense silence settled. Alara felt the weight of decision pressing against her ribs. If she authorized manual rotation, it would freeze executive dashboards. Board members would lose live visibility. It would look like chaos. But she was starting to understand something deeper. Control wasn't the same as security. "Do it," she said. Gareth turned sharply. "You can't just." "Do it," she repeated, firmer. For a split second, their eyes locked in a silent challenge. Then Gareth exhaled sharply. "Fine, temporary override." Rowan moved immediately. He initiated key rotation sequences, hands steady as the system prompted for layered authentication. The room dimmed slightly as non-essential circuits powered down to accommodate the load shift. Blue pulse. "Still there?" "They're waiting," he murmured. "For what?" Alara asked. "For us to relax." He routed physical access codes to the executive vault and stepped back from the console. "We need to move." They climbed from sublevel 2 toward the restricted executive floor. The elevator ride felt longer this time, heavier. Halfway up, Rowan's phone vibrated. He checked it instinctively. The clinic. His throat tightened. He answered in a low voice. "Hey." A pause. Then, concern. The insurance provider's system had temporarily locked verification due to network instability. The appointment confirmation was pending. He closed his eyes briefly. "I'm working on it," he said quietly. "Is she okay?" "She's asking if you're coming home early," the caregiver replied. He swallowed. "Tell her I'm fixing something important." When he ended the call, Alara was watching him. "Family?" she asked softly. "My daughter." The elevator doors opened onto the executive level. Polished marble. Soft lighting. Corporate art lining walls that had never known dust. Gareth walked ahead briskly, projecting authority, but there was strain beneath it now. As they approached the biometric vault door, Rowan spoke again. "If they pivot to reputational damage," he said, "they'll attempt partial data exposure. Enough to cause panic, not enough to empty accounts." "You're certain?" Gareth asked skeptically. "I'm certain they want leverage," he replied. Alara pressed her palm against the biometric scanner. The vault door unlocked with a low mechanical click. Inside, servers glowed in pristine alignment. Executive dashboards displayed frozen metrics. Rowan stepped to the central terminal and began reinforcing the rotated keys with additional randomized layers. "They won't expect manual reinforcement," he said. Gareth crossed his arms. "External consultants are on standby." "They'll be too late," Rowan replied calmly. He paused, eyes narrowing slightly at a subtle fluctuation in the blue pulse feed mirrored on a smaller monitor. "There," he said. The pulse shifted frequency. "They're testing communications channels now." Alara felt a chill. "Client email servers?" she asked. "Possibly. Or public relations feeds." Gareth cursed under his breath. Rowan began constructing a digital decoy, an isolated echo of the company's communication server designed to attract probing signals away from live channels. You're baiting them, Alara realized. Yes, and if they see through it, he glanced at her, they won't. Not immediately. The blue pulse flickered faster, then redirected toward the decoy partition. Hooked. Rowan exhaled softly. Got you, he murmured. Gareth stared at the screen. You make this sound like a game. It's not, Rowan said. It's patience. Alara watched his posture, steady, grounded. Nothing like the arrogance she'd grown accustomed to in her boardroom. He wasn't performing for status. He was protecting something. And for the first time, she wondered if that something wasn't the company at all. If you've ever seen someone underestimated right before they prove everyone wrong, subscribe now, because this is where the real reversal begins. The decoy partition absorbed another probing sequence. Rowan reinforced it again, layering misdirection. They'll think we're scrambling, he said. They'll push harder. And when will they do? Alara asked. Then we traced the pivot point. The vault hummed quietly around them. Outside the glass wall, executives gathered in hushed clusters, unaware that the quiet maintenance tech inside the biometric vault was steering the survival of their empire. Rowan's phone buzzed again. He ignored it this time, because the blue pulse had just shifted into something sharper. Not observation, preparation. And he knew exactly what that meant. Not observation, preparation. Rowan didn't speak immediately. He leaned closer to the console inside the biometric vault, watching the decoy partition absorb another probing surge. The blue pulse sharpened, then fractured into 3 smaller signals. They're splitting traffic, he said quietly. Gareth frowned. Meaning? They realized one channel's a decoy, he replied. Now they're looking for the real one. Alara felt a slow burn of tension spread through her chest. Can they find it? Only if we react predictably. Outside the vault's glass wall, executives whispered in tight clusters. The boardroom doors down the hall stood open. Lights on, screens waiting. They're expecting an update, Gareth said stiffly. We need to reassure them. Rowan's eyes never left the monitor. Reassure them after we close the gap. Another pulse hit, this one brushing against HR records before bouncing off reinforced partitions. They're mapping employee data now, he murmured. Alara's stomach tightened. If that leaks, it won't, he said. You can't promise that. No, he agreed. But I can make it harder than they want. He opened a deeper trace protocol, rerouting the decoy's response time to appear slower than the real server, subtle enough to lure the attack traffic back toward the bait. They're hunting for weakness, he continued. So we show them something that looks fragile. Gareth crossed his arms. This is reckless. It's controlled, Rowan replied calmly. The blue signals hesitated. Then 2 of them redirected toward the decoy again. Hooked. Alara watched the trace log populate with masked routing paths. Lines of code bounced across international proxy layers, each one attempting to hide origin. Can you trace them now? She asked. Not fully, he said. But we can narrow pattern clusters. He isolated the metadata from the redirected traffic and began cross-referencing timestamp intervals. The numbers formed a rhythm. His expression shifted barely, but enough. What? She pressed. They're syncing with a secondary server every 47 seconds. Gareth scoffed. That proves nothing. It proves coordination, Rowan replied. He overlaid the timestamp rhythm against the sandboxed persistence script from earlier. The intervals aligned. They're not freelancers, he said quietly. This is structured. Alara felt the implications settle in. Corporate sabotage. Leverage. Possibly insider knowledge. Could someone internally be assisting? She asked. Rowan didn't answer immediately. He scanned the access logs from the initial reset attempt. There, a credential handshake from an executive-level node. Brief. Almost invisible. Right before the reset authorization spiked. His jaw tightened. They piggybacked off an executive terminal, he said. Gareth's head snapped toward him. Impossible. Not impossible, Rowan corrected. Just inconvenient. Alara stepped closer to the screen. Which terminal? He pulled up the identifier. Boardroom Node 3. Silence flooded the vault. That's impossible, Gareth repeated, but his voice had lost its edge. Rowan turned slightly toward Alara. They needed a high-level handshake to legitimize the reset request. They didn't hack it from scratch. They borrowed it. Her mind raced. Borrowed how? Compromised credentials, he said. Maybe phishing. Maybe a planted access script. Gareth shook his head. Board members don't fall for phishing. Rowan gave him a level look. Everyone falls for something. The blue pulse flickered again, faster now, agitated by the reinforced partitions. They know we're tracing, he murmured. Can they see that? Alara asked. Not directly, but they can feel resistance. He began isolating Node 3 from external communication without severing its internal visibility. Who sits at Node 3? He asked quietly. Gareth hesitated. Alara does. The room seemed to contract. For a split second, time fractured. Rowan didn't react outwardly, but his eyes shifted toward her. She held his gaze steadily. They don't know who I am this week, she said evenly. My credentials haven't been active. Your credentials might not need to be active, he replied. They just need to exist. A beat of silence. The blue pulse spiked again, then ricocheted off the decoy with visible irritation in the data stream. They're accelerating, he said. Which means we're close. Close to what? Gareth asked. To forcing them to reveal their true origin. Alara folded her arms slowly. And when they do? We expose it publicly, Rowan said. The word hung between them. Publicly. Gareth stiffened. We do not air internal vulnerabilities in public. If we don't, Rowan replied calmly, they'll control the narrative. Alara studied him carefully. You're suggesting we bring this to the board, in full view? Yes. Why? Because leverage only works in shadows, he said. Light changes incentives. The blue pulse fractured again, then surged toward the decoy with sudden intensity. Rowan's fingers flew across the keyboard, tightening the trap. Almost, he murmured. On the trace log, one proxy layer hesitated, lagging behind the others by less than half a second. There. A crack. He isolated the delay and drilled deeper, bypassing masked routing long enough to capture a geographic origin cluster. Coordinates flashed briefly before being masked again. But not before he saw them. He leaned back slowly. It's domestic, he said. Gareth blinked. What? Not offshore. Not foreign infrastructure. Alara's pulse quickened. Corporate? She asked. Likely. The blue pulse thrashed against the decoy, then began collapsing inward as its routing paths destabilized under his countermeasures. They're losing patience, he said. And when patience runs out? Gareth asked tightly. Rowan looked at the boardroom doors down the hall. They'll try something bold. The vault hummed softly around them. Outside, executives were taking their seats, unaware that Node 3, Alara's seat, had nearly been used as a weapon against her own company. Rowan closed the trace log and secured the metadata capture. Time to move, he said. Move where? Gareth asked. To the boardroom. Alara felt the shift again, not beneath the building this time, but within it. The attack hadn't just threatened infrastructure. It had exposed vulnerability at the highest level. And now, the maintenance tech who'd been ordered to redo screws twice was walking straight toward the center of power. Not to ask permission, but to reveal the truth in front of witnesses. The boardroom doors stood open, polished oak reflecting the overhead lights like a stage waiting for performance. Executives were already seated around the long glass table, murmuring about temporary instability and media containment. When Rowan entered behind Gareth and the intern, conversation faltered. A maintenance tech didn't belong in this room. That alone shifted the air. Gareth moved quickly to reclaim control. We experienced a minor external disruption. It has neutralized the issue. We are stable. Rowan stopped near the far wall, close enough to the primary display to see the mirrored feed from the vault trace. He didn't interrupt. Alara took her seat at Node 3. The irony wasn't lost on her. Gareth continued, voice steady but forced. There is no cause for concern. As if summoned by contradiction, the main display flickered, not black, not frozen, just enough to remind everyone that stability was fragile. A board member cleared his throat. What exactly happened? Gareth began his rehearsed explanation. Rowan stepped forward quietly. With respect, he said evenly, "That's incomplete." The room went still. Gareth's jaw tightened. "This isn't your..." "It is," Rowan said calmly. Every eye turned toward him. Alara watched in silence. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. He simply reached for the display control and mirrored the trace metadata he'd captured moments earlier. Lines of masked routing paths appeared on the screen. This wasn't random disruption, he said. It was a coordinated probe using layered proxies and an executive-level handshake. A murmur rippled through the table. "Executive level?" Someone repeated. Rowan nodded once. They piggybacked off Node 3 to legitimize a forced reset attempt. All eyes shifted slowly toward Alara's seat. She didn't flinch. Gareth stepped forward sharply. "That's speculative." "No," Rowan replied. "It's time-stamped." He zoomed in on the log. The 47-second synchronization intervals glowed on screen. They synchronized with a secondary server every 47 seconds. When reset authorization reached 99%, it was denied through manual override. A board member leaned forward. Manual override by whom? Silence. Rowan didn't look at Gareth. He didn't look at the analysts watching through the glass walls. He looked at the display. "By me," he said. The words landed heavy. Gareth exhaled sharply. "You're admitting unauthorized access? I'm admitting containment." A pulse flickered on the mirrored screen again, blue, agitated. "They're still connected," Rowan continued. Observation mode, waiting for leadership to declare victory and reopen segmentation. The room felt colder. One board member spoke quietly. "Are you suggesting an insider?" "I'm suggesting vulnerability," Rowan replied. Gareth scoffed. "This is fear-based exaggeration." Rowan met his gaze evenly. If it were exaggeration, payroll wouldn't have locked. Several board members exchanged startled looks. "It locked?" someone asked. For 11 minutes, Rowan confirmed. Client vaults were seconds from forced reset. The room erupted in overlapping voices. Alara raised her hand. Silence followed, not because she commanded it, but because something in her posture demanded it. She turned to Rowan. "What do you recommend?" she asked. He answered without hesitation. Full transparency to the board. Immediate rotation of all executive credentials, independent forensic audit. Gareth snapped. "That will signal weakness." "No," Rowan said calmly. "It will signal accountability." The blue pulse on the display spiked again, harder this time, as if reacting to the room's energy. "They're escalating," Rowan murmured. The boardroom lights flickered. Then, the main display went black. Gasps broke out. For half a second, the room was plunged into shadow. Then the screen returned, not to quarterly metrics, but to a single line of text, Integrity is tested under pressure. No logo. No ransom demand. Just that sentence. A collective chill swept the table. Rowan stepped closer to the display. "They're taunting," he said. Gareth whispered, "Shut it down." Rowan didn't. Instead, he opened the trace log again and watched the origin cluster flicker behind its masking layers. "They want us reactive," he said quietly. "Angry. Defensive." Alara stood slowly from her seat at Node 3. The room turned toward her instinctively. She looked at the sentence on the screen. Integrity is tested under pressure. Then she looked at the maintenance tech who'd stood calm while her empire trembled. "Rotate the credentials," she said. Gareth stared at her. "You can't be serious." "I am." Her voice was steady now. To all board members she continued, eyes sweeping the table, effective immediately. Murmurs rose again, but she didn't sit down. Rowan's gaze flicked toward her, assessing, not surprised. The blue pulse on the screen hesitated, then fractured. The taunting message vanished, replaced by static. "They didn't expect that," Rowan said softly. The room remained silent. Executives who had dismissed him hours earlier were now watching him like the axis of gravity had shifted. And in the center of the boardroom, under lights that had flickered but not failed, the maintenance tech stood steady, guiding decisions that would define the company's survival. Not because he demanded authority, but because he'd earned it under pressure. And somewhere behind the mask of an intern, the CEO understood something irreversible. Power wasn't proven by control. It was proven by who you trusted when everything shook. The static on the main display dissolved into fragmented lines of corrupted code, then stabilized into a blinking cursor. The blue pulse that had haunted the system all afternoon flickered weakly in the corner of the mirrored trace feed. Rowan didn't move away from the screen. "They're recalibrating," he said quietly. Credential rotation disrupted their access tree. Gareth leaned forward across the glass table. "Then we're done here." "No," Rowan replied. "We're finishing." He tapped into the isolated metadata cluster he'd captured earlier. The 47-second synchronization interval was gone, replaced with erratic timing. "They've lost coordination," he continued, "which means their secondary server is exposed." Alara stepped closer, no longer hiding behind the intern persona in her posture, though the room still didn't know. "Expose it," she said. He initiated a reverse trace, using the destabilized routing paths as leverage. The masked layers flickered rapidly, collapsing under the rotated credentials and reinforced partitions. On the display, a location cluster flashed again. This time it held longer. A corporate subnet. Domestic, registered to a shell entity that several board members recognized immediately. Gareth's face drained of color. "That's impossible," he breathed. "It's not," Rowan said. He pulled up public registry data and overlaid it on the trace. The Shell Corporation had a majority stakeholder, a competitor, one that had attempted acquisition talks 6 months earlier and failed. A stunned silence blanketed the boardroom. "They tried to leverage a reset to destabilize us," Rowan said calmly. "Trigger payroll panic, force public doubt, drive valuation down. And then?" One board member whispered, "Then make another offer." The cursor on the screen blinked once more. Then the blue pulse vanished entirely. Connection severed. For a moment, no one spoke. Gareth found his voice first. "We handle this quietly." "No," Alara said. The single word cut through the room with surgical precision. All eyes turned to her. She stepped away from Node 3 and moved to the head of the table. Her voice shifted, no longer observational, no longer neutral. Authoritative. "You deserve clarity," she said to the board. Gareth frowned. "What are you?" She removed the intern badge from her blazer and placed it on the glass table. "My name is Alara Vance," she said evenly. And I've been here all week." Shock rippled outward. Several board members stood halfway from their chairs. "You've been," someone began. "Undercover," she finished. "Evaluating culture, leadership, humanity." Her gaze moved briefly to Rowan. "And I learned more in service corridors than I ever did in this room." Gareth stared at her, stunned. "You humiliated staff to test loyalty?" "I tested integrity," she replied calmly. "And I found it in the last place this company thought to look." The weight of her words settled heavily. She turned fully toward Rowan. "You were the only person who treated me like a human being without knowing who I was," she said. "And today, you saved this company without knowing who I am." The room felt charged. Rowan didn't react dramatically. He simply stood there, hands resting loosely at his sides. "I did my job," he said. "No," she replied softly. "You did more than that." Gareth tried to recover ground. "This is reckless transparency. We can still contain the narrative." Alara's eyes hardened. "We will not bury this," she said. "We will pursue legal action publicly. We will commission an independent forensic audit. And we will restructure executive oversight, effective immediately." Her gaze didn't leave Gareth when she added, "including yours." A flicker of realization crossed his face. "This is because of him?" he demanded. "This is because of us," she corrected. "We underestimated the wrong people." Silence again. Then one board member spoke quietly. The maintenance technician identified the breach before it. Rowan shifted slightly at the word technician. Alara looked at him once more. "What were you before facilities?" She asked gently, not accusatory, not demanding. He hesitated only a fraction this time. "Cyber Defense Command," he said. "Infrastructure protection." A murmur swept through the room. Military. That explained the classified framework recognition. The manual override precision. The calm under pressure. "And you left?" she asked. "My wife died," he said simply. "My daughter needed stability." The boardroom seemed to exhale collectively. Not admiration. Understanding. He hadn't stepped down. He had stepped toward something more important. Alara nodded slowly. "You protected both today," she said. Across the table, Gareth's composure finally cracked. "This is absurd," he muttered. "We're elevating maintenance over executive authority." "No," she replied evenly. "We're elevating competence over ego." Outside the glass walls, employees gathered quietly, sensing something monumental unfolding. The boardroom doors remained open. Witnesses. Rowan glanced toward the hallway, thinking of Mila's pending appointment, the insurance database that had nearly reset. He hadn't done this for recognition. He'd done it so his daughter wouldn't feel instability ripple through her small world. Alara turned to the board one final time. "Effective immediately," she said. "Rowan will oversee a full security architecture review." The title wasn't grand, but the respect in the room was. He met her gaze steadily. "I'll do the review," he said. "But culture needs review too." A faint smile touched her mouth. "I know," she said, and in that moment, under lights that had flickered but never failed, the reversal completed itself. Not loud, not theatrical, but undeniable. The maintenance tech who had been told to redo panel screws twice had just exposed corporate sabotage, prevented financial collapse, and shifted the moral center of an entire company, in full view of the people who once overlooked him. The boardroom didn't erupt into applause. It didn't need to. What settled over the glass table was heavier than celebration. It was reckoning. Gareth stood rigid near the far end. Color drained from his face as legal counsel quietly requested a private word. The competitor's subnet trace still glowed faintly on the display, a reminder that arrogance had almost cost them everything. Alara remained at the head of the table, no longer hiding behind borrowed anonymity. "Effective immediately," she said calmly. "All executive credentials are suspended pending audit. An independent forensic team will report directly to me and to Rowan." Murmurs rose again, but this time they carried no mockery. Only recalibration. Rowan shifted his weight slightly, uncomfortable with attention but unwilling to shrink from it. "I don't need a title," he said evenly. "I need cooperation." A few board members nodded. Outside the open doors, employees had gathered in cautious clusters. Word traveled quickly in corporate buildings, especially when the maintenance tech walked into a boardroom and didn't come out diminished. Alara looked at him again, something steadier in her eyes now. "You said leverage only works in shadows," she said. "We'll handle this in the light." He gave a single nod. "That's how you prevent the next one." Legal counsel re-entered quietly, signaling that formal proceedings against the competitor were already being drafted. The attempted sabotage would not be buried. Poetic justice had a rhythm of its own. They'd tried to weaponize executive authority through Node 3. Instead, that same node had become the spotlight exposing them. Gareth avoided Rowan's gaze as security escorted him out for temporary suspension pending investigation into oversight failures. Not criminal, but negligent. Power had shifted without shouting. As the boardroom began to empty, Alara stepped closer to him, lowering her voice. "I owe you an apology," she said. He met her gaze calmly. "For what?" he asked. "For testing people by diminishing them," she replied. "For assuming pressure reveals weakness instead of character." He considered that. "Pressure reveals both," he said quietly. "Depends who's applying it." A faint, rueful breath escaped her. "That's fair." For a moment, neither spoke. Then his phone vibrated again. This time he answered immediately. "Hey," he said, already softening. A pause. Then relief flooded his expression. Insurance verification restored. Appointment confirmed. Mila's voice carried faintly through the speaker, asking if he'd fixed the important thing. He glanced briefly at Alara, then toward the hallway where employees still watched. "Yeah," he said gently. "I fixed it." When the call ended, something inside his chest finally loosened. Not triumph. Stability. Alara noticed. "Your daughter?" she asked. He nodded. "She almost lost her appointment because of the reset attempt," he said. "Payroll instability would have triggered system flags." Understanding crossed her face. "They threatened more than revenue," she murmured. "They always do," he replied. They stepped out of the boardroom together. Conversations hushed as they passed. The junior analyst from earlier stood near the corridor wall, eyes wide but smiling faintly. "Sir," she said to him softly, "thank you." He shook his head once, just doing the work, but the ripple had already begun. Employees who had once looked through him now met his eyes directly, not with fear, with respect. Class vindication didn't require grand speeches. It required proof. At the lobby sensor panel, the same one he'd been ordered to redo twice, he paused briefly. The screws were still aligned perfectly. He tightened one half a turn out of habit. Alara watched him. "You're staying?" she asked. "For now," he said. The words held a different weight this time. She smiled faintly. "Good. Because culture wasn't fixed in a day. It was rebuilt in moments like this. And the company that had once tested its lowest-ranked employee for obedience had just learned something far more valuable. Dignity scales upward. Near the exit, sunlight filtered through the glass fade, warming the marble floors that had felt cold hours earlier. Rowan headed toward the parking garage, toolbox in hand. No entourage. No ceremony. Just the quiet steadiness of a father going home. Alara remained in the lobby a moment longer, watching him leave. She'd started the week pretending to be powerless to study weakness. She ended up understanding power for the first time. Before you go, what injustice should we tackle next? Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Single dad sold his watch to pay for his daughter's trip. The buyer turned out to be his new boss. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?